Yes, thank you very much, Sophia, and thank you very much for this opportunity to present to you my views on this subject. I think the anti-crisis role is precisely what needs to be at the center of discussions in the coming year and possibly even further. Because this is an unprecedented crisis that calls for a very concerted response from the largest developing economies, from the BRICS economies. And in discussing this anti-crisis response, I think one theme that is, in my view, very important to note is that as BRICS turn 20, I think they're grown up enough to try to deliver an anti-crisis response that is not just confined to themselves. Instead of being introverts, they need to become extroverts in a significant way, and to look at the possibility of delivering growth impulses, anti-crisis responses beyond the BRICS perimeter to a wider range of countries. And this in turn is possible, I think, because there are mechanisms, there are institutions that allow for such a transmission mechanism to take place from the BRICS economies to other developing countries, most notably with respect to their regional partners. Every BRICS economy is a central pillar within a certain region of the developing world, whether it's Russia and the Eurasian region, whether it's Brazil and Latin America, South Africa and Africa, etc. And there are regional integration arrangements, there are regional development banks, there are regional financing arrangements already in existence where BRICS countries are members, and these institutions, these instruments can be used in order to deliver this growth impulse, these anti-crisis impulses coming from the BRICS economies to their regional partners. And I think this vision of how the anti-crisis measures of the BRICS economies can redound to the global economy. It can be taken to yet a higher level, to a global level of sorts. I think what the BRICS countries can look at is the possibility of combining their regional integration arrangements, their regional development institutions, and their regional financing arrangements into platforms that can target certain key priorities, anti-crisis priorities for the developing world and the global economy more generally. So if we're talking about trade, then the respective regional trade arrangements where BRICS countries are members can cooperate together with the World Trade Organization in matters that have to do with reducing trade barriers, including with respect to critical items such as medicine, medical equipment, etc. If we're talking about connectivity, if we're talking about infrastructure, then it's about the platform of the regional development banks where BRICS countries are members, where they can cooperate. And NDB, the new development bank, can play a coordinating role. And of course, the World Bank at the global level can play a coordinating role there in promoting this cooperation amongst regional development banks. Building portfolios, anti-crisis portfolios of the respective projects. And then, of course, we're talking about the macroeconomic stabilization mechanisms. And in this regard, the respective regional financing arrangements where BRICS countries are members can play a role, and they can cooperate in that regard with the BRICS CRA and with the International Monetary Fund. In fact, some of these platforms are already in existence. The World Bank has created a platform for regional development banks to look into issues of cooperation in matters such as migration. And the IMF for several years now has been conducting regular coordination activities with the respective RFAs, regional financing arrangements, that target themes such as monitoring the state of the regional economy, the state of the global economy, and cooperation between regional institutions and global institutions such as the IMF. Then there's, of course, on top of all of these issues that I've just mentioned, the regional, the global, another aspect to the global agenda is the G20, where BRICS countries, of course, all BRICS countries are members, and this is a very important forum where key priorities of anti-crisis policies are being discussed. And of course, there is a role for the BRICS to have more of a coordination in these discussions. Probably there may be a need to speak with more of a unified voice on issues such as the needs of the least developed economies. This is something that I think still needs probably further joint work. And of course, another theme that has to do with anti-crisis response coming from the BRICS is what my Chinese colleague has also already mentioned, the issue of the expansion of the new development bank, and accordingly the delivery of these growth impulses and the implementation of projects across a wider range of developing economies. I think it's only natural for the new members to be selected from amongst the regional partners of the respective BRICS countries in order to facilitate the connectivity projects that may be then financed through NDB loans. Generally, I think when we're talking about the anti-crisis response, there needs to be more of a coordination for BRICS economies, not just amongst themselves, but also with their respective regional partners and the respective regional institutions. This is a tremendous resource that so far is underutilized, severely underutilized in the global economy. Suffice it to say that the resources of the respective regional development banks are larger than those of the World Bank, and those of the regional financing arrangements rival that of the resources of the IMF. So this is something to look into, particularly as in the past several years, the BRICS has been looking into the possibility of strengthening this cooperation with the respective regional institutions in which BRICS countries are members. Now, another theme that I think is very important is the positioning of BRICS in the post-COVID world. And I think certainly reforming global governance, reforming global institutions, and most notably, the reform of the WTO is a key issue here. I think one of the things that the BRICS can do, and I'm surprised they haven't done this so far, is to create a unified bloc within the WTO, because after Russia joined the WTO, all countries, all BRICS economies are part of the WTO. They can create a bloc that pursues key trade priorities in the global economy. Another theme is the positioning that has to do with greater inclusivity and greater openness of the BRICS. And I think in this regard, the pursuit of the BRICS Plus format that was launched by China back in 2017 is very promising and should be most likely actively pursued by China next year when it assumes yet again the presidency within BRICS. And then I think it's also about a different model for economic development, something that has been mentioned by the previous speakers in the previous panel, namely a model of economic development that is more geared towards human capital development, most notably healthcare and education, something that incorporates, a model that incorporates to a greater degree environmental standards, sustainability considerations, and ESG standards. And of course, another theme is related to that, related to this different model for economic development, is more balanced growth, lower inequality. The BRICS economies are currently, and for quite some time, have been amongst the countries with some of the highest levels of economic inequality, not just in terms of income, but in terms of cross-regional, intra-country, cross-regional differences. And I think to conclude, the BRICS need to deliver something more proactive. I think they shouldn't wait for the developed world or for the global institutions to deliver their own vision, to deliver their own panacea. And I think coming up with proactive solutions like, for example, an anti-crisis policy framework. In case there's another wave of crisis, how do we respond? How does this coordination take place across BRICS countries and also in terms of the cooperation with regional partners? This is something that needs to be given significant consideration. And then there's, of course, also the need for greater innovation. Something that Mr. Buchanan talked about when he concluded his speech on China. I think we're starting to see more of that there's less imitation, more innovation, and this has to be, I think, the cornerstone of the new institutions such as the new development bank and the new policies and new approaches coming from the BRICS. Thank you very much.